Have you ever asked yourself this question? How much of yourself would you give up just to survive one more day? Not your comfort. Not your pride. Yourself. Because there's a moment, a very specific moment, when survival stops feeling like victory, and starts feeling like compromise. And the terrifying part? You don't notice it when it happens. By the time you do, it's already too late. When this part of my story begins, I was still breathing. Still walking. Still responding to my name. But something essential had gone quiet inside me. The fight. The arguments in my head. The constant rehearsal of my innocence. Those things were gone. Not taken violently. Not erased overnight. They faded, the way a sound fades when you stay underwater too long. In that prison, pain was no longer the threat. Uncertainty was. You never knew what version of the rules you were waking up to. You never knew which mistake would matter today. You never knew if doing everything right would still be wrong. And when the human mind can't predict danger, it starts reshaping itself to avoid it. That's what was happening to me. I didn't wake up one day and decide to change. I woke up one day and realized I already had. I knew how long to hold eye contact. I knew how fast to walk. I knew when to lower my head and when to stay still. I even knew which officers required silence, and which ones required a quiet, "Yes, sir." That knowledge should have scared me. Instead, it made the day easier. And that's when the real horror began. Because ease in a place like that isn't kindness. It's conditioning. I had stopped thinking in terms of right and wrong. Those concepts belong to the outside world. Inside, everything boiled down to a single calculation: will this bring attention? If the answer was yes, I avoided it. If the answer was no, I complied. That's when I understood something chilling: they weren't watching me anymore to see if I would break. They were watching to see what I would become. The silence around me changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was observant. Move. Wrong. Always wrong. They never called it punishment. They called it training. And every day, Hale watched. Not from a distance. From close enough that I could smell his aftershave when he leaned in and whispered, "Suffering teaches faster than kindness." The first time they hit me, it wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Like I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. They didn't try to kill me. No. They needed me alive. They needed me aware. Because death ends usefulness. One night, after hours of standing without permission to move, my legs shaking, my throat dry, an officer crouched in front of me and spoke softly, almost kindly. "You know why this is happening, don't you?" I shook my head. He smiled. "You're going to be useful here." Later, when Hale repeated it, his voice carried something worse than cruelty. Pride. "Men like you," he said, "they're perfect. You still believe in fairness." And cooperation doesn't start with orders. It starts with silence. It starts with adaptation. It starts with telling yourself you'll go back to who you were later, when later no longer exists. Not broken. Not beaten. Prepared. And that should terrify you far more than any scream ever could. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part people never understand. There was no announcement. No warning. No moment where someone said, "You're different now." The change announced itself through silence. I noticed it the first time an officer stopped correcting me. Not because I had done something right. But because he didn't feel the need to. He looked at me, hesitated for half a second, and walked away. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt like relief. And that's how I knew the control was working. Before, every movement I made felt like a test I was failing. Now, it felt like I was finally learning the answers. But the answers kept changing. Another officer called my name one afternoon, not loudly, not sharply, just enough to make sure I heard. "Stay where you are." I stayed. He didn't come back. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. No explanation. I didn't move. That was the test. When he finally returned, he didn't punish me. He nodded. A simple, almost invisible nod. Approval without words. That was worse than discipline. Because discipline teaches fear. Approval teaches desire. From that day on, the prison felt different. Not safer. Not kinder. More focused. Eyes followed me longer than before, not with suspicion, but calculation. Officers stopped communicating around me and started communicating through me. Small gestures. Raised eyebrows. Quiet signals I wasn't supposed to notice. But I did. Because when survival depends on observation, you become very good at observing. Hale didn't approach me immediately. That was deliberate. Power doesn't rush. Power waits for you to notice it. I would see him across the yard sometimes, hands behind his back, posture relaxed, eyes steady. Always watching. Never intervening. As if he were measuring how far the conditioning had gone. Without touching it. And that's when the realization hit me, they weren't controlling me with punishment anymore. They were controlling me with expectation. I began to anticipate reactions before they happened. Correct myself before anyone else had to. Silence my thoughts before they reached my face. I was becoming efficient. And efficiency is a language prisons understand very well. The moment it crossed the line, didn't feel dramatic. That's what haunts me the most. It felt ordinary. An officer approached me during routine movement. Close enough that no one else could hear. "Stand here." I stood. No hesitation. No questions. That mattered. He leaned slightly toward me, not threatening, not friendly. Intentional. "Watch him." He nodded toward another inmate. Young. New. Still clinging to posture, still walking like rules protected him. My chest tightened. "If he steps out of line," the officer continued, "you let us know." This wasn't an order to hurt anyone. That's why it worked. It was framed as responsibility. Observation. Awareness. Helpfulness. My mind raced for reasons to refuse, but refusal no longer lived where it used to. Because refusal meant attention. And attention meant consequences. The officer watched my face carefully. Then he said the words. Quietly. Casually. Like they belonged there. "Be useful." That was the moment. Not when I nodded. Not when I stayed silent. But when my mind accepted the role before my mouth did. I didn't report the inmate that day. But I watched him. Carefully. And when I realized that, my stomach turned. Because watching was enough. Watching meant I was involved. Watching meant I was part of the system now. They didn't need my voice. They needed my presence. That night, lying on my bunk, I understood something terrifying. I had crossed a line without stepping forward. And the prison had noticed. From that day on, things became easier for me. And harder for everyone else. That's how the system works. It doesn't reward cruelty. It rewards compliance. And compliance spreads quietly. Like a disease you don't realize you're carrying, until someone else gets sick. They didn't call it an assignment. That would have sounded official. Deliberate. Permanent. They called it a favor. It happened on a day that looked exactly like every other day, gray, slow, forgettable. That's how they hid it. I was standing where I'd been told to stand, eyes forward, hands visible, body still. Stillness had become my safest language. An officer approached me. Not one of the loud ones. Not one of the cruel ones. One of the quiet ones. Those were always the most dangerous. He didn't stop directly in front of me. He stopped slightly to the side, close enough to be heard, far enough to look casual. "You've been doing well," he said. I didn't respond. Compliments in prison are traps. "We notice things," he continued. "Who pays attention? Who doesn't cause problems?" That word again. Notice. He glanced down the corridor. "See him?" He nodded toward another inmate. Young. Nervous. Still moving like someone who believed mistakes could be explained away. I followed the direction of his eyes. That was my first mistake. "He's been struggling," the officer said. "Rules confuse him." I stayed silent. "We don't like confusion here." Then came the task. Not an order. A suggestion. "Just keep an eye on him," he said. "If he does something wrong, you let us know." The word sat between us. Heavy. Waiting. I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't violence. This wasn't betrayal, not yet. This was observation. That's how they framed it. That's how they sold it. My mind searched desperately for a way out that wouldn't cost me everything I'd learned to preserve. Refusal meant attention. Attention meant correction. Correction meant suffering. The officer leaned in slightly. Lowered his voice. Something shifted inside me then. Not snapped. Shifted. Like a bone sliding quietly out of place. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I nodded. Small. Barely visible. That was enough. The officer walked away. And just like that, the task had begun. I watched the inmate all day. Not because I wanted to. Because I couldn't stop myself. Every movement he made felt magnified. Every hesitation felt significant. I started predicting his mistakes. Correcting them silently in my head. That's when nausea set in, because I realized something horrifying. I was already helping. Without reporting. Without speaking. I was participating. The system didn't need my voice. It needed my alignment. Later that evening, the inmate stumbled, a small mistake, barely noticeable. An officer noticed. He looked at me. Just once. I didn't react. The officer nodded and intervened. The inmate was taken away. I don't know what happened to him after that. And that's the part one have to live with. Because the question that haunted me wasn't what happened to him, it was this: would it have happened if I hadn't been watching? That night, lying on my bunk, the phrase returned on its own. Uninvited. Unchallenged. I feel useful again. And for the first time, I didn't feel sick saying it in my head. That's when I knew the fracture was complete. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. If you were in my place, if survival depended on staying useful, would you have done anything differently? Take a moment. And if this story is making you uncomfortable, that's because it's supposed to. Stay with me. Because what they asked next crossed a line I can never uncross. The door that only opens one way. After the first task, the prison felt different. Not louder. Not crueler. More precise. I was moved again. Given slightly more freedom. Less oversight. That's how rewards look in places like that. They don't feel like gifts. They feel like permission. Hale passed me one evening in the corridor. Didn't speak. He just met my eyes, and nodded. That nod told me everything. I had passed. That night, I realized something that froze me in place. I was no longer afraid of punishment. I was afraid of becoming unnecessary. Because now, usefulness was the only thing protecting me. And the next time they called me in, they didn't ask me to watch. They asked me to choose. When survival depends on your cooperation, how long before cooperation becomes who you are? Because once you make the first choice, the rest stop feeling like choices at all, and that's when they truly owned me. After that day, things became easier. That's how I knew something was wrong. I was moved without explanation. Assigned small responsibilities. Allowed to move a little more freely than before. Not enough to feel powerful. Just enough to feel separate. Other inmates noticed. That's the worst part. When the people around you start looking at you differently, not with trust, not with hatred, but with caution. That's when you realize, you're no longer one of them. And the officers? They stopped correcting me as much. They didn't need to. I corrected myself now. Hale called me in again. Same room. Same chair. Same calm smile. You're adjusting well, he said. I didn't respond. He liked that. Most men resist, he continued. They cling to who they were. He leaned forward slightly. You let go. I wanted to argue. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. I had let go. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Do you know what usefulness really is? Hale asked. I shook my head. It's predictability, he said. And you're becoming very predictable. That should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like relief. That night, lying on my bunk, I stared at the ceiling and realized something that made my stomach turn. They hadn't beaten me into submission. They hadn't broken me. They had repositioned me. I was still alive. Still breathing. Still functioning. But I was no longer free inside my own thoughts. I measured my actions now by one question: will this make things worse? Not, is this right? Not, is this fair? Just, will this cost me? That's when I understood the real punishment had already happened. When survival depends on obedience, at what point does survival become surrender? Because the next thing they asked me to do wasn't just observation. It was a choice. And no matter what I chose, someone was going to suffer. Including me. Have you ever wondered why some people walk out of prison, but never really leave it? Because freedom doesn't arrive the way you expect. It doesn't rush toward you with open arms. It doesn't apologize. It doesn't explain itself. Freedom waits quietly, and then asks you to live with what you became to survive. The day they told me I was being released, I didn't feel relief. That's the first thing that scared me. No shaking hands. No racing heart. No overwhelming joy. Just stillness. Like my body didn't trust good news anymore. The officer read the paperwork like it was a grocery list. No eye contact. No ceremony. You're free to go. Free. The word felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. When the gate opened, I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of leaving, but because I didn't know who would walk out if I did. I stepped forward anyway. Sunlight hit my face, real sunlight, and for a moment, my vision blurred. Not from brightness. From disbelief. People think prison ends at the gate. They're wrong. That's where it begins. Because outside those walls, there were no rules telling me how to stand. No voice correcting my posture. No system measuring my usefulness. And without that structure, I felt empty. That was when I realized the final damage they had done. They didn't just punish me. They trained me to survive captivity. And survival doesn't disappear just because the doors open. I couldn't sleep. Silence was too loud. Every sound felt like a warning. Every knock, imagined or real, sent my heart racing. I stood when people raised their voices. Lowered my eyes without realizing it. Measured my words like consequences were still waiting. Freedom didn't feel safe. It felt unstructured. And unstructured felt dangerous. That's when I understood something bitter. Prison hadn't followed me home. I had brought it with me. When power loses its shelter. The first sign that something had changed came from the news. Not headlines. Whispers. Rumors. I heard it through a former inmate who found me weeks after my release. "They're investigating," he said quietly. I didn't ask who. I already knew. Prisons don't collapse loudly. They crack from the inside. A report leaked. Then another. Anonymous complaints. Medical inconsistencies. Footage that didn't match official statements. The same silence that once protected them, was now turning against them. Chief Superintendent Hale didn't disappear immediately. Men like him never do. They believe systems owe them loyalty. That belief is always their final mistake. The arrests came quietly. No spectacle. No press conference. Just doors opening from the other side. The officers who once walked past cells with authority were escorted out with their heads down. Not beaten. Not humiliated. Processed. That irony didn't escape me. They were transferred to another facility, not as staff, but as inmates. Different uniforms. Different numbers. Same walls. When I saw Hale's name on the court document, my hands shook. Not with joy. With recognition. Because I knew what waited for him better than anyone. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Loss of control. And men like Hale don't survive that easily. I imagined him standing in line, waiting for instructions. Wondering which rules applied today. Trying to read faces that no longer answered to him. For the first time, he would understand what usefulness feels like when it's taken away. People asked me if it felt like justice. It didn't. Justice implies balance. This felt like consequence. And there's a difference. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. Because their downfall didn't erase what they built inside me. It didn't give back the pieces of myself I had traded for survival. But it did give me something else. Proof. Proof that systems rot when left unchecked. Proof that silence eventually turns on its owners. Proof that survival doesn't mean surrender forever. I still hear the phrase sometimes. In moments of stress. In moments of fear. I feel useful again. But now, I stop myself. And I choose something different. Because usefulness should never be earned through suffering, and survival should never require the death of who you are. This is not a prison story. It's a warning.
And if you think this story ends here, you're wrong. Some truths are buried for a reason and some horrors are still waiting to be uncovered. If this story kept you watching, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next case, the next nightmare, is already waiting. New stories. Darker secrets. Real fear. Stay curious. Stay alert. And remember, some stories don't end when the video does.